My name is Ashley. I'm currently 25 years old and work at a publishing company where my days are filled with busy work. This story is about an episode from when I was still a senior in high school. At that time, I lived with my mother, a homemaker, and my father, a civil servant, in a suburban home from the city. I've been passionate about tennis since I was little, and my enthusiasm allowed me to attend a prestigious tennis high school. At school, while other girls talked about love and cosmetics, I distinguished myself from the typical female student. To avoid hindering my tennis play, I kept my hair short and my skin kissed healthy. It told the story of a girl who dearly loved sports. It's not that I had no interest in romance, but at the time I was so absorbed in tennis that I couldn't pay attention to anything else. Sometimes I would travel to regional cities to participate in tennis matches. Such excursions came with significant expenses such as travel and lodging costs. But thanks to my parents' financial support, I could dedicate myself to tennis. Mom, I have another trip at the beginning of next month. I'm going to a slightly distant place this time, so I plan to stay overnight. Okay, you got it. Then I'll prepare a sandwich for your lunch. By the morning, please eat it on the bus. My mother had a very cheerful personality and was surrounded by many friends. Once a month, she would host a tea party at home for neighbors and friends. She was also actively involved in local events, always entertaining those around her. Her friendly and affectionate demeanor naturally attracted people. My father was the type of person who dedicated most of his life to work. While my mother primarily handled various domestic matters, my father immersed himself in his job, devoting himself to his daily tasks. Intellectual and having been promoted early in his career to department head, he wasn't much of a talker. Unlike my mother, however, on weekends he would show his affection in his way, taking the family to the park or occasionally to amusement parks. I was raised as an only child enveloped in the rich love of my parents. I was certain that this happiness would last forever, but at the time I couldn't imagine that it could all fall apart so suddenly. An unexpected turning point came about 6 months prior to a shocking event. It was when my grandparents, my father's parents, became elderly and started having difficulties with daily life, needing care. One day, a significant call came from my grandfather to my father. The conversation, usually brief, was different this day. My father was in his room, focused on the call for over 30 minutes, while my worried mother kept glancing towards the living room door. After the call, my father returned to the living room and started talking to my mother with a clearly troubled expression. The thing is, it's about my parents. They've gotten quite old, and their legs aren't what they used to be. It seems like they're in need of care. It seemed that the conversation between my father and my grandparents was about the necessity of care. Yes, indeed, they are both nearing 80. It's inevitable to have weakening legs as one ages. My both parents asked to move in with us and for our care, but our house isn't equipped for accessibility, and more than anything, I prefer to avoid living with my difficult father. My father's relationship with my grandfather was not very good historically. Even when they met, they hardly spoke. After graduating high school, my father became independent immediately and started living alone, limiting his visits home to once a year. So his relationship with my grandparents faded over time. Given these circumstances, the call from my grandmother facing difficulties must have been significant. However, it was clear that if my grandfather came to live with us, it would lead to discord in the household atmosphere, something I could easily imagine. Can't your brother help out with taking care of them? Doesn't he live nearby? My father's brother, Uncle Ethan, does indeed live near my grandparents. It seemed like the most ideal choice would be for Ethan, being geographically close, to help with the caregiving, but the situation wasn't so simple. No, it would not be a good idea. Ethan and his wife don't get along with Mom. It looks like we're the ones they're depending on. I'm not good with taking care of others, and ultimately, it'll be you who ends up with the caregiving responsibilities. My father seemed to be suggesting that the caregiving duties would fall to my mother. However, it seemed unreasonable for my mother to extend herself further to care for my father's family when she was already busy caring for her own parents. My mother's daily struggles were evident, and the burden was clear. Yet, unable to forsake my grandparents, she resolved to make the 30-minute drive to their house 3 times a week. My grandparents were always so pleased with her visits. It's really reassuring when you come over. We can't expect any help from Ethan's wife. In this situation, if only you could move in with us, it would be such a relief. Under that situation, my grandparents came to rely almost entirely on my mother for their daily care. Taking care of household chores, laundry, and even bathing assistance was no easy task for my mother to manage alone. Nevertheless, she tackled these tasks silently and without complaint. In addition to caregiving, she had to attend to her own parents, which was an immeasurable burden. My mother never said anything, but she was undoubtedly exhausted. "Mom, are you really okay? If there's anything I can do, please don't hesitate to tell me." Within a short period, changes in my mother's appearance began to show. Her hair had more gray in it, and she looked a bit thinner than before. Witnessing these changes in my mother, I felt that I could not just stand by silently. Despite being busy with school and tennis, I thought I should help with my grandparents' care even though my time was limited on weekdays. Understanding my situation, my mother gently spoke to me. "It's all right, Ashley. I want you to put yourself first, concentrate on tennis, and focus on your own things." Saying this, she smiled, but her smile lacked its former vitality and seemed somewhat shadowed. I resolved to provide as much support as I could. After tennis on weekdays, I started helping with household tasks like preparing meals. Even my father, who wasn't good at cooking, began to contribute by buying tasty side dishes from the grocery store and helping with the folding of laundry. Together, my father and I joined forces to share the household chores, endeavoring to alleviate some of my mother's daily burdens. Seeing our efforts to help with the housework, her face lit up with joy, and she expressed her gratitude. "Thank you so much. I am truly saved by you both helping out like this." Seeing my mother's bright smile, I felt a joy from the bottom of my heart. Gradually but surely, she began to regain her former energy, and her smiles became more frequent. Sometimes our return home was late, but my father and I shared a common resolve to continue supporting my mother. Nevertheless, a rift developed between my father and mother. All of a sudden, my father began to criticize my mother unreasonably. "Why is it that every time I come home, you're not here?" "I'm sorry, I try to come back as soon as possible, but lately my parents haven't been well, and I've been going to them every day. They really need a lot of care. I'm sorry." My mother's parents' health had deteriorated, and she had been visiting them daily to take care of them. Especially my grandmother's health was a concern, and I heard that she might need to be hospitalized soon. "If you think so, then you should take care of Grandma and Grandpa. Yourself. It's not just Ethan. Dad, you rely too much on Mom as well." I was finally able to express the feelings I had been keeping to myself to my father, but he would not listen to my words and did not change his demands towards my mother. He continued to insist unreasonably that others should take care of my mother's parents just because she was married into our family. "Enough, both of you. Please stop the argument. The dinner I prepared is getting cold. Tonight's meal is particularly delicious. Let's eat together." "Okay, I can't eat feeling like this, Ashley. You and your mom go ahead." With those words, he quickly grabbed his wallet and left the house. Lately, my father had been continuing minor squabbles with my mother, each time worsening the atmosphere at home. My mother was desperate to persuade him, but his heart wouldn't budge. Meals prepared with love by my mother were left untouched by him, as he often chose to eat out instead. Watching her pain as her cooking was consistently ignored by my father was acutely distressing. After about a month of this situation, one day my mother suddenly left the house. When I tried to call her, all I got was an announcement saying, "This number is no longer in use." Most of my personal items were gone, and despite reaching out to relatives and her friends, no one knew of her whereabouts. "This is all Dad's fault. It's because you were so cold to Mom that things turned out this way. If anything happens to her, I'll never forgive you." I told my father this, but he looked away with a cold gaze. "Indeed," he replied, "truly." Despite his wife's sudden disappearance, he remained unvainly calm in a situation that would normally cause panic. His reaction only intensified my anger. From what I heard from my father, he had filed a formal search request with the police regarding my mother's disappearance. However, as days passed, there was no concrete information coming in about my mother. During this time, I graduated from high school and decided to distance myself from home. I enrolled in a university with a dormitory, and while dedicating myself to study and part-time work, I continued to distribute flyers on weekends in the city. The flyers had my mother's photo, description, and mentioned a reward of $20,000 for information. However, the information that had come into the police and to me was unreliable, motivated by the reward money, and did not match my mother's description. Dad, have you received any new information about Mom? It's unbelievable that despite all our efforts to find her, we haven't found a single clue. I regularly called my father to ask if there was any new information about my mother. However, no significant details came from him. After my mother disappeared, initially Ethan and his wife took care of my grandparents. But soon, due to a falling out, they were forced to move into a care facility. Furthermore, my maternal grandmother, who had been ill, eventually passed away due to her illness. I was painfully reminded of the significant impact my mother's absence had on those around her and how much her presence meant. Time passed, and it's almost 7 years since my mother's disappearance. Legally, after 7 years of disappearance, a declaration of absence is made, and the person is considered deceased, which means the mystery of my mother's whereabouts may never be solved. Well, now I'm officially free, plus the insurance money has come in. Not too bad, right? Hearing my father joke about being free and the insurance money while holding a bank book filled me with deep fear in the depths of my heart. The worst suspicion that my mother might no longer be in this world surfaced. Anger towards my father's frivolous attitude bubbled up inside me, and a desire for revenge began to take root. But even with these dark emotions, I lacked the courage to act, and I spent my days crying in frustration and sorrow. However, a few months after the declaration of my mother's disappearance, an unexpected opportunity to reunite with her came while I was immersed in work. I received a rare call from my father. Reflexively, I answered the phone during work. "Hello, what's up? Are you okay? Your mother has come back home." "Really? I can't believe it." "It's true. You can come home early today. There's something we need to talk about," he said before hanging up. For the past 7 years since she disappeared, I've been desperately searching for her, trying everything from filing a police report to handing out flyers and posting on social media. Unfortunately, not a single clue has surfaced, and all the tips I received were from people seeking reward money, with descriptions that didn't match hers. As the years passed, the legal declaration of her disappearance was made, and she was declared deceased in the family registry. However, the reality was utterly different, and the shock of learning she was actually alive was immeasurable. I explained the situation to my understanding boss and left work early, hurrying home. My memory of the journey is hazy, but before I knew it, I was standing in front of my childhood home. Doubt and hope wrestled in my mind as I wondered if Mom could really be on the other side of the door. 7 years had passed, mixing joy at the prospect of seeing her again with anxiety about where she had been. I took a deep breath to calm myself and muster the courage to open the door. The first things I saw were Dad's worn-out sneakers, next to them a pair of flashy high heels, out of character for my usually modest mother. Entering the living room, the figure I saw left me dumbstruck. Could it be Mom? The woman with the distinctive beauty mark under her left eye looked nothing like the mother I remembered. Her hair was a flashy bronze, curled tightly, heavy makeup, clad in flashy clothes, and drenched in strong perfume. Not the mother I knew. "Ashley, is that really you? You've grown so much." "Mom, why are you dressed like this? Where have you been all this time? Do you have any idea how much we've searched for you?" Even as I saw my mother tear up, the anger in my heart didn't subside. I asked her firmly to tell the truth. "I was so shocked by what your father said that I stayed with an acquaintance to settle my heart. Just spending time there. Do you think that excuse is acceptable? You've been missing for 7 years. What have you been doing all this time, and why show up out of the blue now?" My outburst of anger seemed to take her by surprise, but she quickly regained her composure, smiling at me calmly. That's when I fully realized that the warm and kind mother I once knew no longer existed. What do I want? It's clear. I wish for us three to live together again as a happy family. That's possible now. You've been legally declared missing, and in the family registry, you're considered. I didn't know that, she exclaimed, seemingly unaware that after a 7-year disappearance, a person is legally considered deceased. When I informed her of this fact, she looked shocked. Even if my father were to forgive her and want to start living as a family again, it was clear that there were legal barriers to overcome due to her declared absence. When a missing person is found alive after being legally declared as such, the family must go to family court to proceed with the cancellation of the declaration of absence. Despite this knowledge, the thought of living with my mother again did not grow within me. Even though her presence was confirmed, my feelings towards her, whom I had longed to see for so long, were now entangled with complexity. At that moment, my father, who had been silently observing, stood up and walked towards his room. I'm sorry for keeping silent, but I had a detective agency investigate your mother's actions. Inside this envelope are the details of the numerous acts of infidelity that your mother is alleged to have committed. Infidelity? You mean? I was shocked. I took the envelope from him, pulled out the documents inside, and read them carefully. There were detailed accounts of my mother's infidelity over the past few years, including photographs as evidence of her affairs with people I knew, such as acquaintances, family friends, and even school teachers. It made me feel sick with shock. How dare you do this? Invading my privacy like this is unforgivable. What's unforgivable is your behavior. You had been having inappropriate relationships behind my back for months before you left. Wait a minute. Months before leaving? What are you talking about? The reason my father had become cold towards her was that he had discovered her infidelity. My mother had started coming home late 6 months before she left, which seems to have been due to rendezvous with her lover. A few months later, my father's attitude changed drastically, and he became cold towards her. This change was likely due to him sensing my mother's affair. However, why didn't he talk to her directly, and why didn't they get divorced? The reason was astonishing. Actually, your mother was involved with a gangster member at that time and got pregnant with his child. He was quite a dangerous type, and the thought of anything happening to you, I had to be cold. It was all to protect you, to be strict with her on purpose all this time. I thought he was just unilaterally angry at her. I believed my mother left because she couldn't stand the pressure from her husband, but the reality was completely different. Her infidelity and the pregnancy that resulted from it were the real reasons she disappeared from our lives. My father had been portraying her as the villain to protect me from a dangerous person. He must have been worried that if I knew about her lover, I might act impulsively. And to prevent me from being involved in any danger, he kept quiet about her. So why did my mother suddenly appear after all this time? When I asked my father this question, an unexpected answer came back from my mother. Actually, I broke up with that person years ago. I couldn't raise the child on my own, so I reluctantly left the child in an institute. On top of that, I was facing financial difficulties and was about to be evicted from my house for unpaid rent. That's why I wanted to live with my family again and came back here, she said. Filled with anger at her self-centered reasons, I stood up and looked down at her. Can you really say something so irresponsible? Do you think you're behaving like a proper parent, acting only on your own convenience? I can't possibly live with someone like you. Don't be so cold. It's a long-awaited reunion, isn't it? You could at least call me Mom a little more kindly. I can't think of you as my mother anymore. I've reached my limit. Really, please take your things and leave right now. I never imagined reuniting with my mother like this. When I told her to leave, she was clearly shaken and had a look of disbelief. Why? I thought everyone would be happy I came back. Why are you so angry? She seemed completely unable to comprehend why she was being reprimanded so harshly. How much my mother's essence had changed. My heart was filled with anger and sadness, and I couldn't stop the tears. Beside me, my father quietly comforted me, gently rubbing my back. Didn't you realize how much pain your thoughtless actions caused to the family? It's impossible to live with you again after this. Take your things and leave immediately." When he told her to leave the house, I noticed that my mother was speechless and unable to say anything about the situation. She silently packed her things and made the decision to leave. I didn't wish for a reunion like this, but it became a reality, and I felt a deep regret for having been cold to my father for 7 years. "Dad, I'm really sorry. I didn't understand anything about Mom, and I've been cold for such a long time minus 7 years. I felt tears welling up every time I thought about him." "Don't worry about it, Ashley. In any case, I've caused you pain. I deeply regret that." I was surprised to see him, who had always maintained a strong demeanor, shedding tears for the first time in front of me. Amidst this, my mother made efforts to restore our family bond and succeeded in getting the declaration of disappearance annulled at the family court. However, even with the annulment of the disappearance, I felt that we could never return to the warm family atmosphere of the past. Nevertheless, my mother kept visiting our family home, trying to mend the relationship with us. I had reconciled with my father and lived with him again. My mother also harbored a strong desire to be accepted again as a part of the family. "Please, I want to live as a family again. I've been evicted from my house and don't know where to go. I just want to cook delicious meals for you again." My mother had been using an old motel as a temporary refuge and based herself there while making ends meet. Occasionally visiting our family home, no matter how earnestly she tried, the feelings of us were not so easily changed. Just because we had been deeply hurt by her betrayal, no matter how many times you come, it has no effect. "I will never live with you under the same roof again. If you keep coming, be prepared that I won't hesitate to call the police immediately." With that strong declaration, I shook off my mother's restraining hand and hurried to my workplace. The persistent visits from her had left me feeling utterly drained and at my mental limit. After much distress, I seriously considered consulting a legal professional to request a restraining order to legally limit my mother's contact with me. The unease I felt when returning home only grew, weighed down by the possibility that she might be lurking outside the house once again. But that day was different from the usual. Upon arriving home, I saw no sign of my mother. Instead, Tucker, who was a neighbor, noticed me and hurried over. "Actually, your mother was in the area today." There was some commotion. In the end, we had no choice but to report it to the police. "She was reported to the police? What happened?" According to Tucker, my mother was desperately seeking our family's understanding and asking for help from the local community. However, the locals, knowing about her dramatic change and the fact that she had been missing for 7 years, didn't want to assist her. Instead, they reacted with what seemed like contempt for my mother's altered appearance. Regardless of what I look like, that's beside the point. What's more important is whether you'll listen to my request, even a little. Since you've been gone, your husband and daughter have had a really tough time. How could I encourage them to live with you again?" The people in my neighborhood all repeated similar sentiments to my mother. Among these neighbors were those who had helped search for her when she went missing. When they saw her return in such a flashy manner, they couldn't fail to suspect that her disappearance involved some issue with a man. She shouted, feeling ridiculed by their blatantly mocking attitude, "Don't make fun of me," and in her anger she shoved one of the neighbors, Stevenson, who was standing there. "Ouch, that hurts. I've hurt my backside. Can someone help me?" Stevenson lost his balance unexpectedly and fell to the ground. The bystanders immediately called an ambulance, and he was taken to the hospital. The police arrived quickly at the scene, and as a result, my mother was arrested. "I'm truly sorry for what has happened. I honestly don't know how I can apologize enough." After the incident, I visited our neighbors' homes with my father, bringing them an assortment of sweets as an apology. Considering the possibility that my mother might come here again in the future, we decided to move and ultimately sell our family home. One day, 2 months later, my father's condition was clearly different. His complexion was pale, and he had no appetite. When I insisted on accompanying him to the hospital, the diagnosis revealed that he had terminal cancer. "Dad, please stay strong. Just the fact that we can finally live together again makes me very happy." Faced with my father's current situation, I was pained by this unforeseen turn of events. Especially, I now felt a strong sense of regret for having been cold to him in the past. Ashley, when you were little, I was always so caught up in work. I didn't give you enough time. I'm truly sorry about that. But now, being able to live together again is the happiest thing for me. I'm deeply grateful. I could see the sincerity in my father's eyes as he expressed his gratitude to me. But in reality, I was the one who should be grateful. It was his support that allowed me to enjoy tennis and opened the way to university. I deeply understood that where I am now and who I am today is all thanks to him. Dad, I am really thankful. Being your daughter has been my greatest pride and joy. As I conveyed my heartfelt thanks, tears of gratitude and emotion quietly streamed down my father's face. Just 2 days after that moving exchange, his health rapidly deteriorated, and he passed away peacefully. During his lifetime, he had spoken to me about his will. Despite the hardship after my mother left, he deeply cared for my future and had saved a considerable amount of money for me. I felt an endless gratitude towards my father. At the same time, a profound sense of loneliness, wishing we could have spent more time together, filled my heart. I've heard that after serving my mother's sentence, she is working multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet, living in a very affordable, time-worn house. During her time in prison, she deeply reflected on her past mistakes and is now working hard. According to a call from a neighbor, my mother went to Stevenson's house to apologize in person. At that time, she appeared changed from her flashy past, having regained the composure she had before she disappeared. There has also been an offer for her to apologize to me directly, but I am not ready to face her yet. So I asked the neighbor to convey this and to avoid meeting her. I was told that she looked very forlorn at the time. 3 years after my father's passing, I married a colleague from work, started a happy married life, and the following year I was blessed with a lovely child. Thanks to the inheritance left by my father, I am able to raise my child without financial worries, and for that, I am immeasurably grateful. Becoming a parent myself, I've come to truly understand the deep love one has for their child. I often think how happy my father would have been to see this joy. I've resolved to live my life to the fullest for both my father and myself, and together with my husband and daughter, I plan to lead a fulfilling life.